Global affairs analyst and a lawyer, Olosha, joins me on the news for for analysis of these latest incidents. Talk to us about. Thanks so much for joining us. First and foremost, talk to us about your reaction to the missile strikes across Ukraine, which has led to the major power cuts.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Let me start off with a disclaimer that the views expressed today are entirely mine. They're not endorsed by the United States government or any of its agencies. Well, let me answer your question. It appears that the recent bombardment, the almost 100 missile strike that we saw recently against Ukraine, launched by Russia, was probably some kind of retribution for Russia's loss of the Kherson region. Of course, Kherson was a strategic city which Russia had occupied since March, and so it appears that Russia is now shifting its strategy, and it's now determined to wage some kind of war of attrition by degrading the infrastructure of Ukraine, which of course has left a loss of power and heat to numerous communities. 80% of the city of Lviv is without power and water supply right now.
Moscow is actually blaming Kiev for the attacks. Is this Russia exonerating itself, or a sort of way of shifting blame?
Well, in terms of, well, if we're talking about, the recent news was there were some missiles landed. I don't know if it was inadvertently or accidentally in Poland, which left two people, which killed two people. That was earlier in the week. And Moscow, even intelligence, U.S. intelligence, and NATO intelligence, they've indicated that the strikes were not from Russia, but Ukraine, in Ukraine's attempt to counter missiles that were fired from Moscow. In any event, everyone is in agreement that Russia is the ultimate aggressor. They were the ones who instigated the whole war in the first place with the initial illegal annexation of the Crimea region in 2014. They also sponsored and supported pro-Moscow separatists in Ukraine. And of course, it escalated to full-scale war with the invasion in 24th of February, 2022. That's this year. And so, of course, Russia has its demands, which is from President Vladimir Putin's sort of doctrinaire notion of Ukraine being part of Mother Russia, which is a bit of a stretch. And he says Ukrainians and Russians are one. And so, their demands, that's Putin's demands to sort of annex the areas of the Donbass region in sort of, consistent with the Minsk II agreement, which was to sort of grant self-government to, areas of the Donbass region. Now, there's a history here. Russia and Ukraine, they've had long historical ties back and forth. Of course, Ukrainians, they have their own nationality, but you can say about 20 to 30% of people living in Ukraine are, they identify as ethnic Russians, especially in the southeast region. And so they've reached an impasse here where, Ukraine demands that they want a total withdrawal of Russian forces, while Russia is saying they want areas of the Donbass region to have self-government because they're, pro-Moscow. And so Putin seems to be intent on establishing a puppet regime in Ukraine, which is contrary to international laws and, which encroaches on the sovereignty of Ukrainians.
Yeah. So what would you say to the United States, the U.S. Department of State, calling on Russia to stop its abomination in Ukraine, that it has no chance of winning? Do you consider this call actually coming at the right time?
Well, of course, it appears Putin appears to have imagined that his occupation would be a cakewalk. But Ukrainians have shown a lot of gusto. They've shown a lot of written fights, and they've fought for their sovereignty. Regardless, Ukraine is not a NATO member. And, the challenge for Russia right now, everybody wants to see a cessation of hostilities. But the challenge for Russia is inadvertently hitting a NATO ally, a NATO member, which would, of course, trigger military action by NATO forces, and including the United States. So Russia obviously doesn't want that. Yeah. But again, as we said, they have this doctrinaire notion that Ukrainians and Russians are one, which Ukrainians resist, and the idea that they want that areas of the Donbass region, which including the Crimea, which they annexed illegally in 2014. So ultimately, we're looking at some form of war attrition by the Russians, just hoping that that Ukrainians will be worn out. Of course, Ukrainians can't survive without the supplies, support from the West. So we're still seeing how it goes.
Right. So the use of missile in the past weeks has really, sparked a lot of concern. Looking at the global warming, looking at the impact of shooting missiles and attacking people, killing people, and issues like that. Do you think these actually call for a global concern?
Well, these two nations are very important in the world. Russia is a major supplier of gas, and of course, Russia is a nuclear power. So we don't want to see, it's still it's a legacy of the old USSR superpower, which had rivaled the United States, and of course, it was ultimately defeated. But now it looks like there's a concern that Putin, who's the president of Russia, wants sort of a reemergence of that superpower status. That's one. And, it's a major gas supplier, so it can use this sort of to blackmail the rest of the world. We're seeing skyrocketing prices. Now, Ukraine, on the other hand, is a very fertile area, right? It's a major supplier of grains, wheat. And fortunately, we've recently seen some kind of concession by Russia when it extended by 120 days the supply of the ability of Ukraine to supply grains through few ports to the world, right? So they could continue to export grains to the world. It was a Turkish broken deal. In any way, we're seeing rising inflation. It's not only had an adverse impact on Ukrainian economy, which is contracted, but at the same time, it will hurt, global prices, heating in Europe. Russia supplies gas to Europe, and it's using this as a wedge.
Absolutely. Well, lawyer and global affairs analyst Olu Osha, thank you so much for your time on World Now. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.